Keynote speaker, very important person to have, a keynote speaker at an event like this. So our keynote speaker this evening has worked as the principal ecologist for Norwich City Council, managing 290 hectares of natural area, including woodlands, marsh and grasslands. She created Norfolk's Biodiversity Action Plan. She also worked with the Lisburn Borough Council and was employed by the Ulster Wildlife Trust. She delivered the community environmental education to schools and local groups within the borough. She was responsible for developing Wild About Waste, the environmental education programme. She's very experienced as an auditor for environmental projects. She's got a PhD from Queen's University Belfast on ecology and the distribution of the Irish hare. She's got a Bachelor of Science from Aberdeen University. She's a native of Bohola in County Mayo. Would you please welcome Dr. Karina Dingerkus.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Sometimes one forgets all what one has done. Firstly, I'd like to thank Westport Tidy Towns for inviting me here today. And I'd also like to echo the words said formerly that, you know, the Tidy Towns groups do a tremendous amount of work throughout the county, not just Westport. And I had the privilege of working with Westport and 4 other Tidy Town groups during last year. And I was really inspired to see all the brilliant work that they have been doing throughout the county. So today I was just asked to talk about a little bit about biodiversity. Sometimes we don't necessarily know what biodiversity means. And when I go into classrooms, into school classrooms, I always chat to the kids about what they feel biodiversity means, and they'll always talk about the animals, the wildlife, they'll talk about the trees, but what they often forget is that we as humans are part of biodiversity as well. And that connection that we have with the world around us is very important, and it is sometimes something that we forget. And of course, as humans, we also have a huge impact on biodiversity as well. So for me, biodiversity is every living thing. It doesn't matter if it's a tiny insect, a bug that might be living in the ground, or a huge fin whale, a tree, or a little piece of algae. Everything around us that is living is part of biodiversity. I was lucky to grow up, as I said, in Bohola, and we lived on a small farm, so I always felt connected to the world around me. You know, we'd have to walk up through the fields to milk the cows, or walk down to the far field to collect the cows for milking. And then when, during the summer, my father liked to go fishing, so we'd end up at the coast. So I'd spend my time searching through rock pools, looking for wildlife. And I always felt that connection with growing up. And in the last 50 years, Ireland has changed an awful lot. I remember growing up, you know, going into neighbours' houses, and they didn't have running water or flushing toilets. We were lucky enough to have those things, but some of our neighbours didn't. Not only has the environment changed, sometimes for the better, but also sometimes for the worse as well. So back in 1971, when I was born, the population of Westport was only just over 3,000, while today, or certainly in the 2011 census, it was over 5,500, and it's probably even more these days. And in those days, there wouldn't have been much traffic on the road. People would have walked everywhere. But it was still probably a lovely place to be, but they wouldn't have had all the beautiful flowers that you have there today that bring colour and everything else into the town. But they also wouldn't have had all the traffic that we have today as well. So Ireland has changed an awful lot. So our farming practices have changed as well. 50 years ago, there have been very few tractors around. Most of the fields would have been cut by hand. Silage wouldn't have been cut, so it had all been hay meadows. People working on the farm using their hands, very little machinery. And those hay meadows were very important, and for wildlife. Even going to the creamery, that would all have been done with horse and cart, or any kind of ploughing would have been done. Again, horses would have been very important, donkeys for transport. And those old-fashioned farming methods were really important because the wildflowers thrived in those hay meadows. Some of the plants even have names related to them. So there's a plant called the hay rattle, also known as the yellow rattle. And that used to grow in the fields, and it's a very important bee plant, but you don't find it as much today. So in the past, those hay meadows would have supported loads of flowers. The flowers in turn would have supported insects, and the insects in turn would have supported lots of birds and other mammals. But today, we've lost so much of those native wild floras, and our agriculture tends to be dominated by fields of ryegrass, silage cutting, which may be done twice or 3 times a year, and none of that encourages all those wildflowers that used to grow in our meadows. And if we go to the east of the country, then we've got these huge, big, expansive farms for growing grains, and quite often hedgerows would have been removed. Not so much in Mayo, but certainly hedgerows have been lost in Mayo over the last 5 to 10 decades. And those hedgerows too, they support so much wildlife. Insects, birds, they also act as wildlife corridors for animals to go along. Things like bats, for example, will use those hedgerows as wildlife corridors. So in those past 50 years, Ireland has changed so much. And I can't, for me growing up, because I've always been passionate about nature and getting out and enjoying it, I can't imagine a world where I wouldn't do that. But I feel today, with the advent of screens and everything else, we seem to have become disconnected from the very thing that brings us joy. And we forget that there is a natural world out there, and that not only does it give us joy, but it gives us so much other things as well. So, biodiversity is responsible for giving us clean air, clean water, for giving us food, for allowing insects to pollinate, fertile soil, fibres, all these things, they all come from biodiversity. So biodiversity is really, really important. But I think one of the most important things of all is the quality of life that it gives us. If you're sort of cooped up inside, just getting outside, going for a walk, enjoying the fresh air, enjoying the things that we might see when we walk, that to me is one of the most important aspects of biodiversity. So that connecting to nature is really important. And the quote from our research talks about every child being born a naturalist. But I think within us, all of us have this innate connection with nature. And it's just that somewhere along the line, we seem to have forgotten about it. And we're more interested in what's on Facebook, or who sent me an Instagram, or who's been Twittering lately. So we need to perhaps step back and reconnect with nature and find where we're going. And it's wonderful to see the Young Tidy Towns group and all the activities that they've been doing. Because kids, they will, if you introduce them to nature, they soak it up. They get inspired by it. There's this lovely story I heard of a dad bringing his child for a walk, and they were walking through the wood and they were enjoying themselves. And it was the autumn, and the dad pointed out a conker to the child, and he saw it and he picked it up and he liked it, and he liked the shape of it, and he put it in his pocket. And then they kept walking and they found another one, and the child picked it up again. And soon the child was running ahead, and he was finding all the conkers that he could find. Because before that was pointed out to him, he hadn't noticed the conkers on the ground. But the adult was there to show him that, look, what's that? And he could pick it up and he could feel it and he could admire it. So by the time he came home, his pockets were bulging with conkers. And I think as adults we have that responsibility to pass on the love of nature that we have. So I'm always really grateful when I get to go to schools and work with kids. And there's other simple things that we can do. Firstly, to help biodiversity, but also to allow ourselves to become reconnected with nature as well. We might think about planting wildflower meadows. We might have a small area of lawn that maybe we could allow the grass to grow tall. And in creating those meadows, we're replacing the hay meadows that have been lost through farming practices. And if we have wildflowers in our gardens, we will attract loads of different insects, butterflies, bees, all different kinds of pollinators. Dave Gulson has he's a professor in the UK, and he's written a number of books that are very easy for people who aren't scientists to read. And one of them is A Buzz in the Meadow. And in that book he talks about how plants are the bedrock. The plants, they capture the energy from the sun, and these in turn then support all the other animals. So if we don't have the flowers, be they wild or cultivated ones, we're not going to have the insects. And if we don't have the insects, we're not going to have the other animals. So everything with biodiversity, everything is connected. Just as we are connected with nature, everything in the ecosystem is all connected together. So we may not want our lawns to grow wild, but can we create a pollinator-friendly garden? And simple things like planting plants in our gardens that provide nectar and pollen for our bees and our butterflies. So even just planting herbs or planting those old-fashioned cottage-type plants that provide so much colour. And the important thing is to have a long season. So we start plants that will start flowering in early spring right up until October, because the bees and the butterflies, they need something to feed on during all that time before the first frost comes and they go away. So even just having a few pots and some window boxes filled with herbs will provide food for bees and butterflies and other pollinators. And one of the things I'm always telling community groups is, leave your dandelions to flower. We might not want a wildflower meadow in our lawn, but we can leave our lawn. When spring comes and the dandelions come, don't start itching to get out there with the lawnmower. Just hold back. You're going to spend all summer mowing the lawn, so wait a while. 4 or 5 weeks, allow those flowers, the dandelions, to flower. They're a really important food source for those early emerging queen bees when they come out of hibernation. If you think that bumblebee, that queen bumblebee, she's been hibernating, sleeping since maybe September, October. She wakes up in March, April, she's really hungry and she needs something to feed on. So just by leaving dandelions in your lawn, you can provide a restaurant for all those pollinators. Just a simple thing. Outside my office window I have a bird feeder, and I love just watching the birds come. It's a great distraction. When you should be doing most work, it's a great distraction to watch the birds come and feed. And again, it's just a really simple thing that you can do. Even if you don't have a lawn, you can get one of these feeders now that you can stick on the windows. Maybe you've got an office that's a bit boring, hang a bird feeder outside it and watch the birds and enjoy them. And every bird has a different characteristic. So the goldfinches, which is the colourful one on top there, when they don't come to bird feeders very often in my garden, but when they do, they're the bosses. They chase every other bird around. They're real cheeky little devils. While the bullfinch, which is the one down here on the bottom, they're very shy birds and they won't come to the bird feeder at all. So they need hedgerows to feed in. So we can get to know the characters of the birds in our gardens. And of course, everyone's favourite is the robin. Again, they're looking for the bits that are falling off the bird feeder. You want to give them a bird table because they find it very difficult to hang off a bird feeder. But they will come to a bird table and they will take things. And if we're out in our gardens, often they'll come and they'll join us. This little robin is too years ago, when I was out digging in the garden, he would always come down and he'd always be looking for, well, actually not worms, he preferred leather jackets. I don't know if you know what they are. They're like little larvae about this size, and they're really thick and juicy looking, and he preferred those over the earthworms. So we can get to know the nature around us. All the pictures that I'm showing you today, these are all pictures from Mayo, right? So these are all animals and birds and insects that we find just in our own county, and we have such a wealth, and we should really, really try and appreciate them. Another thing we can do is provide some fruit. That could be for ourselves to eat, but also for the wild animals as well. This year we were lucky, we had loads of apples, but we had to share them with the blackbirds. They would like them as well. But you know, by providing food, we encourage the animals into our gardens. And of course, without the bees and the hoverflies and the solitary bees, we wouldn't have any apples anyway, because we need them to pollinate. So it's only fair that after the insects pollinate our apples for us, that we share them with the wildlife afterwards. A pond. When we built our house, one of the first things we did, other than put in a vegetable garden, was to dig a pond. And over the years, the number of frogs visiting that pond has increased year on year. So we started off maybe with about 10 or 20. And last year we had over 100 frogs in the mating season, so right in February time. Oh, and this is not a big pond, you know, it's a quarter the size of the stage. It's just a small little pond. But just by providing the water, the frogs come. You know, we didn't even have to put spawn in the pond. The frogs found it themselves. And as well as frogs, you get loads of different insects as well that love coming to visit the pond. So the damselflies and dragonflies. And then we're also lucky enough to have the newts as well, which is this guy here on the left. So a pond is another great resource to add to your garden. And trees, of course. Now we don't want to put in a big beech tree, which is the tree in the middle there, into our gardens. Smaller trees like apple trees or birch trees that aren't going to grow too big. And then those beautiful big beech trees, they can be planted into the community spaces and open spaces around our garden. So I just wanted to give an example of some of the beautiful butterflies and other animals that we have in Mayo. So here, for example, we have the tortoiseshell, the ringlet, and then the cinnabar moth, which is actually a day-flying moth. It's not a butterfly at all, even though it's very colourful. It flies during the day. And then the red admiral over on the right-hand side. Beautiful butterflies that occur here in Mayo all the time. And then flowers. I love spring flowers, so I'm not a great January person. I really like February, March, April when the flowers start coming out and we get those nice longer days. So primroses, wood anemone, wood sorrel, beautiful spring flowers. And then here on the left we have grass Parnassus. It's quite an unusual flower, quite rare. We get it around Loch Con, along the shores of Loch Mask as well. So again, beautiful flowers that give us so much enjoyment because they're just, you know, I'm always impressed by the structure and how they grow, and they just keep coming back year on year. And then in our coastal areas as well, we have the beautiful harebells, one of my favourite flowers, sea holly, knapweeds, and ragworth. Unfortunately, ragworth tends to get a bad name, but if I show you the next slide, down on the bottom left here is the caterpillar of the cinnabar moth, that colourful moth I showed you earlier. And that caterpillar relies on ragworth to actually feed. But often we're told, oh, ragworth's just a weed, dig it up, take it away. But we always should leave it a little bit somewhere because things like cinnabar moth, they depend on that plant. So again, with biodiversity, it's how everything is connected, how everything is joined together. And we can't just take away one thing and think that it's not going to affect the whole environment. And I'm sure if David Attenborough came to Mayo and he could do this amazing programme on all these wonderful caterpillars we have, you know, things like the hairy mollies and the poisonous, because the cinnabar moth caterpillar is poisonous, and also the tortoiseshell ones, which are the black ones with the spikes as well. So you could see him doing this really dramatic programme describing all these amazing caterpillars that we have here in Mayo. And this moth is an emperor moth, so it's a big moth, really obvious, but so beautiful, beautiful colourings. And then, I mean, that's just a fraction of what we have. Shield bugs, beetles, ground beetles, all these different insects thriving in Mayo. And of course, my favourite, the bumblebees. So in Mayo we have, I don't have a picture of it, I didn't think to put it in, we have the great yellow bumblebee, which is an extremely rare bee and now almost restricted to coastal regions of the west coast of Ireland. And Belmunnet is a stronghold for that bee. But we have many other beautiful bees, bumblebees, white-tailed bees, cardinal bees, heath bumblebees. And if we can provide flowers for those, then you know we're helping everything else along the way as well. And of course, there's lots of I'm not sure it's going to start for me now. There is lots of animals that are out there that we don't see. So I'll see if I can get this going. Yes, there he goes. So I did my project on the Irish hares, my PhD, so I'm particularly keen on hares. They're such wonderful, wonderful creatures, but often we don't even know they're there because often they're only active during the night. And this little fellow down, can you see him in the bottom there? This is a pine marten. And 50 years ago, or even less, 20 years ago, there was hardly any pine martens left in Ireland because they were exploited, they were poisoned because they were seen as something that took gain. But pine martens are thankfully coming back now, and there's some in their creature that's beginning to be seen more and more regularly around the place. And they have their place as well, just as the next one does, which again, he's going to start here. Just let him go and then I'll move on to the next slide. And these are all, just have a little camera trap, and we managed to photograph these just within a few feet of the house. He's not going to move, is he? So quite often people don't like foxes, but they forget that, you know, foxes, they will prey on rats and mice. It's one of their main prey. So they're a very important part of our wildlife as well, part of what keeps the whole thing ticking over. I think it's going to do this now. I'm going to go a second time. There we go. So it doesn't matter where we are in Mayo. We can be on the top of Nathan, or we could be down Patrick by those amazing cliffs. We could be down at the shore, down at Beltra, down at the beach. All these places are, you know, we're blessed in Mayo to have all these wonderful habitats. And I suppose it's up to us to look after them. We have woodlands, we have bogs, we have fens, we have loads of lakes, and it is up to us. I suppose we're looking after these places for the people that are coming next to us. So as well as doing our own little bit for biodiversity by planting flowers or digging a pond, we should be going out and appreciating all these amazing places that we have in Mayo. It doesn't matter if they're rivers or lakes, and our farmland as well, while it has changed a lot in the last 50 years, is still a valuable place for much of our wildlife, for the hares and the pine martens and the foxes that we were seeing there as well. So I just encourage everyone just to do your little bit for biodiversity, and thank you very much.